Welcome to the Plant Trainers Podcast, where we're helping people improve their quality of life through nutrition and fitness. And now, your hosts, nutrition and wellness coaches, international speakers, Adam and Shoshana Chaim.
Hey, I'm Adam Chaim.
And I'm Shoshana Chaim, and we are
Propelled by Plants. Today we bring to you episode 355, How and What to Eat with Julieanna Hever and Ray Cronise.
In this episode of the Plant Trainers Podcast, we talk with Julieanna Hever and Ray Cronise. They are the authors of the Healthspan Solution, How and What to Eat to Add Life to Your Years. Julieanna was on the show on episode 41, and Ray is a first-timer. If you like details and science, you're really going to love this one. Here we redefine what calories are, we talk about energy, and we discuss how to be more nourished and what you should be eating every single day.
Julieanna is known as the plant-based dietitian. She bridges her passions for food, presenting, and helping people. She's authored several books. She's been featured on several talk shows like the Dr. Oz Show and the Steve Harvey Show. She's also the co-host of Science and Saucery podcast with her co-host Ray Cronise, who's also here today, who is a scientist-innovator who focuses on diet and nutrition and is the co-founder of Lifestyle Reauthored, a lifestyle transformation company. He is best known for being the mastermind behind Las Vegas magician's Penn Jillette's plant-based diet 100-pound weight loss. He's been featured in several forms of media. He's just a brilliant mind. And today, the two of them and us, we share so much great information that you're really going to love. So get ready to dig in deep with this one and share it out with those that you think will need to hear these messages. Such an important and informative filled podcast. We hope you enjoy it.
If you have preschool children or school-age children at home like we do right now, you're probably struggling to find the balance between child-led play and school kind of structure. And our kids are not responding very well to really school structure at home right now. So we need to engage them in different ways to have them learn, to have them interact, to have them build skills without them really feeling like they're at school or we're trying to do something unnatural. So our Yummy Foods activity book has come in handy for us and a lot of other people out there. So you can go ahead and click the link in the show notes, click the shop on planttrainers.com, or just go to amazon.com or amazon.ca and you could order it right then and there. It'll be at your house in just a couple of days and you will be able to have your children have fun, learn, and even take part in the recipes.
And now for a moment of gratitude.
I'm grateful for the Plant Powered 30. That's an Instagram live that we have been doing on our Instagram at a specific time every day. And the reason why I love that is because we have gotten to know so many of you guys more. Those of you who listen to the podcast and join us on Instagram, being able to interact, answer questions, just getting to know everybody has just been so wonderful. And I'm grateful for this technology that allows us to do it.
I'm grateful for those amazing beet burgers that we've been having every week. They're super delicious and super packed with great nutrition. Love them.
Ray Cronise and Julieanna Hever, thank you so much for joining us on the Plant Trainers Podcast today.
Thank you for having us.
It's great to be here.
We would love to know if you have a moment of gratitude to share with us. And Ray, since you're new to the show, why don't you go first?
Yeah, I think really the thing that I'm most grateful for right now is the fact that we live in this unbelievable time of massive communication. You know, what's going on worldwide now is the first time that scientists, engineers, physicians have been able to really tag team on a single thing. And so while short term, there are going to definitely be some downsides to it, I think long term, it opens up to just a sort of exponential technology in terms of being able to really attack something at a global level. And it's the first thing we've ever really come together on. It's kind of like an alien invasion in some sense. And I think I have a lot of gratitude that this kind of thing happened now when we had this kind of technology to deal with it and respond to it.
Yeah, and we are recording this now in the thick of things in March with an estimate release date of, more of the middle of April and end of April. And it will be interesting to see where we're at that time. But I think that since we're doing physical isolation and not being able to be social together that this is so much more than the telephone. And I think it's really helping people get through a lot of the mental challenges that people are facing right now, for sure. And Julieanna, what about you? What are you grateful for right now?
Yeah, I'm grateful for all of that. I do hope that in April, everything is back to normal. I don't think anything will be exactly back to normal, but I hope things have improved and we're out and about and, that the damage wasn't so bad. But, whenever I think of gratitude, the first thing, of course, I think about is my children and my family and, and just waking up and, having the health that I have. Like every day you wake up healthy and it's like, oh, thank goodness. So I have a lot of gratitude. I'm kind of going through a whole phase of really focusing on what I'm grateful for, because it really does help when you're anxious and all this stuff is uncertain. It's really good to go back to what you have and who you are and who you're surrounded by and all the people that you love and can love.
Absolutely. And we're grateful that everybody here is listening and that they're taking the time to invest in themselves like they normally do. And hopefully the listenership has grown a little bit because people have been at home and have had more time to listen to podcasts. And maybe those people who have been with us for the last 5 years may remember you from episode 41, where we talked about your plant-based journey and being whole food plant-based and nutrient absorption and protein and B12 and all those good things. And we are so excited to just be able to be here, like you said, Ray, in terms of giving people through technology opportunities. And we really want to look deep into calories and micronutrients and nutrients today. And given all of those books behind you guys, for those people watching on YouTube that can see all those books behind you, I'm pretty sure you have a great understanding of the history of a calorie.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, my message has changed tremendously since we spoke last, since I started collaborating with Ray. I mean, I would love to just kind of interject really quickly before we get into all of the details. I did spend, 10 years defending the nutrient adequacy of a plant-based diet because that's most people were concerned about. Where do you get your protein? Where do you get your fill-in-the-blank nutrient? And when I came together with Ray about, almost 4 years ago, 3.5 years ago, and I started diving into all of the Healthspan and longevity research with him, and it blew my mind that there's this crossroads between the Healthspan and longevity evidence and what we have as a plant-based diet. And all of those myriad health advantages of eating plants, I think, coincide with the fact that dietary restriction without malnutrition is the only nutritional way we have ever extended healthspan and longevity in every model organism tested from yeast to primates. So basically, what a plant-based diet naturally restricts or limits may be why it is so advantageous. So I'm no longer defending the nutrient adequacy. I'm no longer saying, don't worry, you can get this here and you can get that there. I'm more like, just eat vegetables, fruits, whole grains, legumes, mushrooms, nuts, seeds, herbs, and spices. And that's really the most you need to worry about. So it's kind of changed a lot. It's kind of exciting.
I think it's interesting because so many people are worried about all those little nutrients and macronutrients and micronutrients. And we've always said we never counted calories. I've never counted a calorie, really. And I just ate a full variety of fruits and vegetables, the colors of the rainbow. And I figure I'm okay. And I love that you're about to tell me that I am okay. At least I hope.
Yeah, and in fact, it's probably better than okay, which means, when we look at life, we really can look at life in sort of three segments. What it takes to get from, say, 0 to reproductive age of 15, what it takes from reproductive prime, which is approximately 15 to 20 years, and then what it takes to raise your youngest offspring, 15 years. So anybody looking for an ancestral diet, et cetera, evolution's pretty much done with you about 45 or 50. Because you're no longer passing on your genes. You're no longer sharing your genes. So at that point, it isn't going to be part of that genetic code. Now, here's the part that's really interesting, which is we can survive on lots of things and make it to reproductive age. We can eat lots of things and reproduce. There's no world population problem right now. And there's a whole wide set of sort of optimal nutrition throughout the world. In fact, some of the poorest places with the worst nutrition still have some of the biggest populations because that tends to track with education and with other kinds of resources, not necessarily with nutrition. But, the kinds of foods that we eat to maximize those healthful years after reproductive prime is over, it turns out that the only way we've extended life in the lab, and it works from yeast to primates, or extended health span if the organisms live longer. So, with a yeast that lives 3 days, it extends one level. But the only way we've ever done that is like what Julieanna said, was with dietary restriction without malnutrition. And why that's important is that while everybody else is obsessed with getting enough, one of the unintended consequences may be that people are setting themselves for dying early by getting too much. If you think about all of the major chronic diseases, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, autoimmune disease, many cancers, they're all diseases of excess. They're not diseases of deficiency. So this sets us up for the new kind of thinking where we're taking an entire science that's been going on for almost a century, certainly 80 years, and then we're really intersecting with the health benefits we've always seen on the plant-based side without explanation necessarily. You know, it's one thing to explain it and say, well, I eliminated the animal products and my diabetes went away. It's another thing to say, well, why? Why? And it may not be all the extra nutrition. We're using that same dietary adequacy that Julieanna learned in school.
So, it's interesting because I've never actually put the two together, although I've said them both independently. And, people will say all the time, well, where do you get your protein? And are you getting your iron? And are you getting your this or your that? And just to say in my head, and put that together in the same sentence, that those are not the things that I'm scared of. I'm scared of everybody else's diabetes and cardiovascular disease. We say all the time, nobody dies of protein deficiency, but really, it is getting too much that is really the problem. And you can get too much within the plant-based world as well. So it's not eat all the spinach in the world, because you could still end up with health issues because you've eaten too much spinach. And one thing that I've recognized, and again, I don't want to get too much into what's going on in the world right now, I want to stay focused, on what we're talking about, but we have been eating a lot less being at home because we're not moving as much. And that has made me reflect also on the types of things that we're eating and making sure that we're getting what we need throughout the day as opposed to getting an excess of things.
Yeah, and it may be that moving has really nothing to do with it. In other words, the idea that we connect activity to calorie is a pretty sort of loose idea. I mean, my longest medically supervised water fast was 24 days, and I never ran out of energy. To ask the audience a question, how many Oreo cookies do you believe it takes to get to the top of the Westin in downtown Atlanta, 73 stories, 20 minutes climbing all of those flights of stairs? And, spoiler alert, the answer is 3 1/8. So this idea that you are eating or swallowing to justify wiggling is really kind of backwards. What's really going on here is we got plenty of energy, as you guys well know. We can eat a lot more and not necessarily gain, but we won't necessarily lose. And this is something you saw as a change in what we're doing.
Yeah, we have a lifestyle transformation company, and we take people through dramatic transformation into, eating plant-based and massive weight loss. Our client this week just passed 153 pounds of weight loss. And all of our clients, we take them away from exercise. Like there's no exercise during, we call it weight loss, WAIT, weight loss. And, and everyone has exactly predictable results. Everyone loses 0.6 to 0.8 pounds of body fat a day on average over the span of their whole program. And it was mind-blowing for me coming from a personal training background. And when I was working with clients and doing weight loss and everything before we started working together, of course, exercise was connected. That's what we were taught, calories in, calories out, all of that, all those energy equations. And it was mind-blowing to see how those two physiologies compete, exercising and trying to lose weight. And I know we're not talking about weight loss, we're talking about energy directly, but it's an interesting thing to think about.
Yeah. And one other way to maybe frame this so that everybody can see, just imagine that you were carrying around a full bucket and you were turning the spigot on. And, you're never noticing it's not over full, meaning you're not gaining weight. You guys are both lean. We're all, healthy weight. So the bucket's not getting any bigger, right? But how would you differentiate right now? How would you differentiate the difference between eating an adequate amount and eating an excessive amount if your thermodynamic bucket is overflowing, i.e. it's leaving your body as waste heat within 2 to 4 hours of you swallowing it? And that's what happens to all the excess protein That's why nobody's saying, oh, if I eat a lot of protein, I get fat. We've never heard anybody say that, have we? But we hear them say, I eat a lot of carbs, I get fat. But here's the truth. The truth is that in both of those cases, one step down in the TCA cycle, there's no difference between an amino acid and glucose. They're both metabolized the exactly same way, and neither one of them are turned into body fat. The fat that we eat is the fat that we wear. I've heard John McDougall say that so many times, and I think it's true. But in the presence of these other things that are taking our metabolic time, we end up storing that fat a little later. And so when we look at this and we look at how we can sort of reimagine food, then go back and put those two things that you said that you hadn't put together before, which is, how do you know if your bucket's overflowing, if it's leaving your body as waste heat and you're not aggregating the fat? Of course, if you have extra body fat, you can see that you have an excess, but most people are stable. Even people that are 40 pounds, 50 pounds overweight, they're not going to be 300 next year. They've been consistently overweight by a certain amount for a period of time. So the point is, if they're stable, if they're not constantly climbing, then the bucket's just sort of overflowing, that extra food that they're eating. Now, in order to get the benefits we see in model organisms, we got to have 30% less monkey chow. That's all they did, 30% less monkey chow, and we saw 6 events over 30 years of cardiovascular neoplasia, glucoregulatory issues, or cardiovascular disease versus 28 events in a normal fed, not excess, but normal. All they did was 30% less monkey chow. And what that says is a lot of times the food that we're eating might not be making us overweight, but it could be superfluous calories. And we don't have that concept that we calorie count in our head. Now, when you're home like you are now, you're not just socially eating. Most of the time we swallow socially. Julieanna, you've talked about this a lot.
Yeah, I mean, we do. We everything about food is social, and everything about socializing is food. And we would say food is a universal social lubricant because everything we do, from funerals and birthdays and holidays, and everything is surrounded by food. So it is very interesting right now, and I'm curious when this comes out, what's going to have changed. It's very interesting right now to hear all the people that are home. A lot of people are saying they're complaining because they're overeating because they're not used to having constant access to the fridge, and the lives are so different right now. And a lot of people are worried about gaining weight and eating too much and then not getting their exercise. So it's very interesting times right now.
Yeah, and at the same time, if you think about it, we're home. But I think everyone's got a little bit of consciousness about the calories and a little bit of consciousness about the things in their, in their pantry or in their refrigerator, right? Because there's just this little bit of apprehension. What happens if the food supply were to run short? Because, you see some of these shortages. I don't believe that is going to happen unless there's a major economic event, collapse. But other than that, what's really interesting is that I think people are going to have a tendency to just sort of eat a little bit less because it's just not as convenient, right? I mean, that's one of the things that happens when we go out to eat. They don't call it fast food for nothing. And, there's no reason why fast food couldn't also be healthy food. But the fact of the matter is we're doing it often to really, to socialize. It's just another form of getting together. We share a swallow, and so we end up in this idea where we end up overnourished, not necessarily overweight, but overnourished through all of these social touches that we have. And right now on a restriction or a lockdown, or at least consciously be thinking about it, it's like, really, do I need another bowl of rice right now? Do I need another salad right now? I could probably eat one and it'd be fine. But right now I might say, okay, I probably don't need another burrito. We have burritos today.
So in general, does that mean that people are just eating too much food, period?
I think so. I think more people die of overnutrition than undernutrition. And I think the statistics bear that out.
Absolutely. And not only eating more than we need to eat, generally speaking, but more of what we shouldn't be eating. So like more of the foods that are rich and full of adulterants and animal products and all that stuff that promotes all these chronic diseases too. So there's like this whole excess thing happening. And to go back to what you said before about, on a plant-based diet, you could overeat spinach, but even worse now in the last 10 years or 15 since I've gone plant-based, there's this explosion of all of these foods out there that are vegan, plant-based, and again, they claim this burger is exactly like a meat burger, but that's not a good thing because we want to get away from the meat burger for nutritional reasons, for health reasons. And here we are with so many options and so many different, how many different ice creams and cheeses. And I mean, anything you could eat, I could eat vegan like never before. There's been this huge explosion. And I keep saying, because it's so shocking to me, is that for the first time in 15 years, clients are reaching out to me that are vegan and have been vegan and are having the same issues as the omnivores that come to me for nutrition counseling, and hypertension and high cholesterol and high blood sugar, stuff we never saw really before. Because when you were vegan, you were eating healthy, like whole foods. And now there's just so many options. So times have changed significantly since we last spoke.
Yeah,
They have.
It's super easy to be unhealthy eating those Oreo cookies that got me to the top of those flights of stairs. And so for people that want to go healthier, it's easy for us to just say, yeah, go on a whole food plant-based diet and you'll be fine. But how do we actually get people to move away from those processed foods that are not healthy and bring them into a healthier world where they could make the right choices that are going to get them to increase their lifespan, like you talked about in your book, The Healthspan Solution?
So I've stopped. I'm not going to try to convince anybody to try to change anything, because I say you could lead a human to healthy, but you can't make them eat. And food is so deeply, deeply personal and psychologically very, very significant in someone's life. And it has to come from within. And I think that we won't work with people until they are ready. We will never we try to turn everyone away. We will not work with you unless you really want to do this no matter what. Because if you don't want to do it, go do something. You could find someone that'll teach you to do whatever you want to do. You want to do keto, paleo. There's plenty of dietitians out there that will teach you how to do that. And, and vegan too. But I just think that if you want the information, we will teach you and shower you with love and information and how to and what to buy and recipes and meal planning and all of that, because there's so many amazing foods out there and so many amazing recipes. And like never before, talk about access. Not only do we have all these junk foods on the market, but we have unprecedented levels of options for recipes and cookbooks and blogs and podcasts. There's so many options out there. So it's really not hard. You just have to want it. And I think what happens, most people come to us because they've gotten to the end point where they have a major diagnosis, they've lost a family member has a diagnosis, or they're just sick and tired of feeling sick and tired. So it has to come from within. I really have seen that, because no matter who I've tried to convince over the last 15 years, it never was effective unless it came from they wanted it.
So let's give them a little bit more of an understanding of why they would want this. Explain to us a little bit about what the metabolic winter is. What's the hypothesis there?
Yeah, so maybe just back up and say, well, let's just start with bury the lead, and let's just start with what we want them to eat, which is vegetables, fruits, whole grains, legumes, mushrooms, nuts, seeds, herbs, and spices in combinations of soups, salads, sides, and sweets. Boom, that's it. And in this case, sweets isn't dessert. Sweets are just like fruit dishes. So when you look at our book, the way we've divided our book is soup, salad, sides, and sweet. It doesn't matter what time of day. So we don't use time of day eating. So there's no reference to breakfast, lunch, and dinner because it's irrelevant. It's great for restaurants to know what to serve you. But when restaurants are closed, it doesn't matter what you eat the first thing in the morning. It just doesn't. Or if you eat the first thing in the morning, it really doesn't matter. Nutrition's not an emergency. The second thing is that, we don't have any nutrition information in our book. None. We have serving sizes, and even that we made it up. So it doesn't matter what recipe you pick out of our book. Eat as much of it as you want. If you're binging every day, you'll see the scale will move and you'll know that you're eating too much. But it's exactly, like you guys said earlier, I eat and I don't worry much about that stuff. So we broke a lot of those rules. And then the idea behind breaking them is a lot of people are walking around, when a magician uses a magic wand, it should come as no surprise that the wand does nothing. It's just a piece of wood. But it does have a purpose, and its purpose is if something just happens, which is impossible, and you don't have an explanation, your brain doesn't like registering it. But if he waves a wand, or if he sprinkles some dust, or he does something, your brain stops for just a second and says, wow, that was magic. It may be that the magic of nutrition, the magic of protein, carbs, and fat, the magic of this is having us focus on something that's really not that important in the day-to-day sense. I'm not saying that as scientists or dietitians that they don't have a real biological and scientific meaning. What I'm saying is it's mostly marketing the way it's being used and talked about and discussed, So, but when we take all those away, what we end up doing is focusing back, and this will be the sort of the segue to metabolic winter hypothesis. We sort of take back this idea of just trying to eat enough, but not that superfluous amount we want. And so the metabolic winter hypothesis is a paper I wrote with Andrew Bremer at NIH, and then David Sinclair, who's at Harvard. He has a really amazing book that just came out called Lifespan. And the idea behind it is that our bodies adapted in a world of scarcity. We talked earlier about evolutionary diets and what we may or may not have eaten. And contrary to all the sort of a carnivore advocates, et cetera, of course we ate meat in the past. There's no question we did. So anybody that says we're designed to eat plants, this is not right either. The point is we can eat anything for those little phases of life, where we're making it to reproductive prime or whatever. The fact that we can eat all kinds of things is what makes us so successful. And it's also what makes us be able to choose how to maximize those outer years, which we both believe is going to be plant-based. So it turns out that during times of abundance, we become more fecund or more reproductive, and reproduction surges. So if we go back to the time before refrigeration, transportation, all the modern HVAC, there were a lot of children born in February, March, April, because the photo period peaked during the summer. That's when there was the most food available. And yes, it was because it, floats up from the bottom up from plants and from photosynthesis all the way up through the food chain. And so there was more food available and we become more reproductive. And conversely, when food is scarce in the winter, our bodies go into a conservation mood. And so it turns out in a lot of organisms we've looked at in the lab, this idea of fecundity and longevity seem to be inversely related, meaning when we're the most fecund or the most reproductive, we live the least. And vice versa, during times of scarcity, it's like our body hunkers down, like we're right now in society. We're in survival mode. Things become more efficient. We start really thinking about the stuff that we're preparing. We start really thinking about the trips we're making. We start really thinking about the content. And the other side of that scarcity is the idea that we actually kick in mechanisms, and they're specific genes, the sirtuin genes, we talk about this in the book, that actually make us live longer. And we can hopefully one day activate those with pharmacological interventions for radical lifespan extension. But for right now, the idea is that this time of mild cold stress and dietary restriction without malnutrition paradoxically makes things more healthy. And we think about it in the last, 0.9 inches of our 7 million year evolutionary mile. Refrigeration and transportation changed everything about our access to food and what we can eat. And the only species that are obese and chronically ill are us and the pets we keep warm and overfed. They get exactly the same doggy diabetes and feline leukemia, the exact disease that we get. And yet we don't see those, you don't see fat dogs waddling around in nature. Feral dogs are typically lean because they don't have access, but they reproduce. Feral cats reproduce. Like, we know that this is not, it's that they're getting enough, but that when you look at your dog, if your dog or your cat is overweight, the only reason it's overweight is because you socialize with them with food. And they socialize with you back, but that's the only reason. And this is a really, Julieanna was a big pet owner here of us. I've always had pets, but she really has passion about dogs. But this was just a really new thought for you too.
Yeah.
I always thought it's always funny when you see somebody's pet and they look like the owner in body shape and size. I always found that very funny.
Our hair, our style. I mean, it's really fun how we gravitate towards that. Yep.
Right. And so we socialize with food. And so if you think about this and you don't look at it negatively and you say, okay, this happens, when they say, well, diabetes runs in family, so do recipes. So do favorite foods.
And habits.
And habits, right?
So Sorry, do you think that if we wouldn't have had refrigeration or we wouldn't have access to groceries the way that we do in this day and age, we wouldn't be facing the overpopulation problem that we're having on the planet right now?
Overpopulation is a completely different subject, and I don't think we have an overpopulation problem. In fact, if you look at every problem. We have an overeating problem, but I don't think we have an overpopulation problem. In fact, what you've seen consistently is when education and access to affordable energy, et cetera, gets to a level, birth rates go down naturally. Right now, the United States is not on track to replacement birth rates, right? So we see this in modern society, and they're really good. Our podcast we just released when this show came out is with a very good close friend of mine, a business partner of mine, Peter Diamandis, has an amazing book called The Future is Faster Than You Think. In fact, it's part of a trilogy. The first one is Abundance, the other one's Bold, and this one's The Future is Faster Than You Think. And it really turns out, though, we're suffering. This is the first time in human history that the number of overnourished outnumber the undernourished, and that's as of 2011, according to World Health Organization. Not only that, obesity is a symptom of poverty. And we got to think about that for just a second. I mean, what other organism has that problem? What other organism has the problem of obesity, too much energy? And in the nature, you might see it with, say, rats that live amongst humans or pigeons or squirrels or something like that. Obviously, we just talked about pets, but we just don't see this because the world is naturally scarce and our body adapted. And from an evolutionary pressure, we have adaptations for scarcity, but we don't have adaptations for excess. Excess came occasionally, but it was our access to food that probably regulated a lot of this. And so one of the things that when we look at this, one of the things that for Julieanna and I have done together is seen that, when you limit that food, a lot of those things correct themselves.
Just a small little break so that I could let you know that I know that you can get frustrated with your children when you want them to eat more plant-based, when you want them to eat the meals that you're putting on the table, when you know that they might not be getting all the nutrients that you want them to because they're choosing not to eat what you're putting down in front of them. I understand that frustration, and that is why we created the Putting an End to Picky Eaters program, where you have videos, spreadsheets, recipes, and more to help you learn the skills that you need to get your child to be eating more nutritious plant-based foods. So check it out at planttrainers.com/shop or in the show notes. Now back to the show.
Yeah, so if we didn't have refrigeration and transportation and food every single corner, every single time, this, everywhere, all occasions, all day long, 24/7, you can get delivery and all that. If we didn't have that, we would definitely have less overnutrition, less obesity, and less chronic diseases, for sure. That's the number one reason for all the problems. It's just opportunity everywhere, all the time, and a lot of social pressure. There's a lot of social pressure to eat. And that's the biggest thing we do with our clients, because everyone knows how to lose weight and how to reduce. It's all the psychosocial pressure around you all the time. This constant bombardment of, what are you eating? Why aren't you eating that? Why are you eating? Where are you getting your protein? How could you not eat that? When was the last time so many questions. It's just mind blowing how much pressure there is now socially when it comes to food.
Yeah, you can't have a conversation without it coming up anymore either.
Right. And wouldn't it be an ultimate irony? Because I came to a plant-based diet purely from my own selfish health. I was overweight and I had diabetes and I did not want to be sick and overweight. And I stumbled into this. I mean, I tried lots of other things, and it wasn't that I wasn't doing them correctly. I just wasn't getting the results that I got with this. But wouldn't it be the ultimate irony that there's so many people, I have the history of even the vegetarian and vegan movement, so one of my first books by Cheyenne starts in 1742. So they were already starting to talk about that. And what was really interesting is 200 years ago, the way the ethics of this worked was that people were trying to live, and it was part of the temperance movement, people were trying to live more in a better state. For obviously, in this case, it was for a god, right? So there was lots of other kinds of rules. And that saving animals, not eating animals or being savage was just a byproduct of living a better, more moral life. Okay, so that's kind of the genesis of the vegan vegetarian movement. And as we fast forward through the temperance movement, it sort of goes to a crescendo during Prohibition, and then eventually we outlaw alcohol too, and then that comes back. But now we move forward, and I think it would be sort of an ultimate irony that we have all of these people now that feeling compelled to not eat animal products for sort of a what I would say a not cruel mission, but they say a not humane mission. And I don't want to call it a humane effort. And the reason why is you can't take the human out of humane. And so now if we're creating whatever burgers that have the same profiles and the same kind of deleterious effects that we see in the meat products, and then we say, well, but we're not killing any animals, but we're having our fellow humans die early of a preventable death, to me, this seems like a really flawed philosophy. And so what Julieanna and I want to do is we set as our goal maximum human flourishing. We want humans to flourish. We want them to be well. We want them to be healthy. We want them to be happy. And we're eating plants. So, that other just sort of roll downhill, when it comes that way, but when you turn this goal around and make it truly a humane effort is, has to involve human health and human well-being. And I'm not happy with the idea that Julieanna 10 years ago, well, I'll let you describe how your clients have changed over the last decade.
No, I already said that.
Okay.
That it's just been that now all of a sudden, because of those products, because of the excessive amino acids, because of the excessive saturated fat, all the sugars and stuff that people are still eating now have been able to introduce back into the diet, we're seeing the same health effects. Yeah.
So before I turned 40, I was told I wouldn't be seeing the age of 40. I was told I'd be gone because of my personal health situation. And I made it a point to change my lifestyle because I wanted to be around to watch my kids grow up, to be with my wife and live a long life. I wanted to lengthen my lifespan, and I found a whole food plant-based diet, and that helped me get to where I am now. And for people listening that want to learn how to lengthen their lifespan, what kind of foods should they be eating? Is it just eat fruits and vegetables and you're good? Or are there specific foods that we should be looking at incorporating into our lifestyle?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I mean, we love to have our list. Our list is, and there's a reason for this list, so I'm going to say it one more time. So we want you to eat a wide variety of vegetables, fruits, whole grains, legumes, mushrooms, nuts, seeds, herbs, and spices. And then we've added in tasty combinations of soups, salads, sides, and sweets. Because think about it, okay? First of all, we'll talk about 6 daily threes too, but you could have anything made out of those things. There's so many combinations you could put together. We had burritos today. You can make all sorts of different pizzas and soup, tons of different soups, stews, chilies, bisques, chowders. There's like no limit to what you can make with those ingredients, just no limit. And then you could add all of the different flavor profiles from around the world. We have recipes that are Indian flavored, like spices and herbs. And we have lots of stuff from Thailand. We spent a lot of time teaching in Thailand the last couple of years. We have dishes from around the world. So you can incorporate all those different spice blends and herb blends and just the way you combine those foods. And there's no limit to what you can eat. So it's not that I like for people to not go, oh, I can't have this, I can't have that. 5 ingredients, poultry, fish, meat, eggs, and dairy. I mean, there's a whole world beyond that. And what happens when you go plant-based is you have to shift your thinking to, what else can I eat? Like you have to change how you look at the plate. And I think that's a good thing because it kind of pushes us outside of our comfort zone. I had to teach myself how to cook, and there was no blogs and websites that much back then. I don't even know if there were blogs back then. I guess they were just starting back then. And so it's like I had to learn how to cook and what do you make? And I had a couple cookbooks to start with. And all of a sudden, a few minutes later, the publishers asked me to write a book and asked me to do 50 recipes. And I'm like, I don't know how to do a recipe development. So I literally taught myself how to cook. And that's how easy it can be. It doesn't have to be complicated, and it doesn't have to be gourmet and fancy, and it doesn't have to be expensive. There's this whole spectrum of food that you could eat, from very simple, very affordable, very staple, all the way to very elegant and gourmet and, complicated in terms of recipes. So we talk about that. There's so many ways to make amazing, delicious food. The other thing is the 6 daily threes. So I like to have people kind of prioritize. So if you think about all those different foods and all the things, what do you want to think about on a day-to-day basis? And so this is like the foods that will give you nutritionally unique profiles that you may not be able to get everywhere. So one of them is legumes. So beans, lentils, peas. I would say hummus should be a food group. Tofu and tempeh, soy foods also count in that category. So we recommend having, about 1 to 1.5 cups a day of legumes. And then cruciferous vegetables and leafy green vegetables, the minimum is 3 servings. It's 6 daily 3, so 3 servings of all of these. And if you go to our website, healthspansolution.com, we have a whole post just on 6 daily 3, so you could have a visual of it. So leafy greens, cruciferous, all the, broccoli and cauliflower and bok choy and cabbage, all those things that have unique phytonutrient profiles that, you just want to flood your system with for optimal health. And the third one would be other colored vegetables like the oranges and reds and yellows. And you want to eat, like you said, eat the rainbow every day, eat a couple rainbows every day. I love to say that to my child clients, my teenage clients, because it's something very, and actually adults, it's very visceral, right? You know what that means, look for the different colors. And then the other one would be fruits, 3 servings of fruits a day, try to mix it up and get different colors. And the last one is nuts and seeds, because there are certain nutrients in nuts and seeds that are unique, like L-arginine, and there's just certain things that you want to make sure that you're getting about 1 to 2 ounces a day. So it's like a handful, not much. So we turn those into dressings and sauces and put them on salads and other foods. We just use them for sauces, and it's a great way to get them in every day. And that's it. And the 6 of the 6 daily 3s is to movement throughout the day. But those are the things to prioritize. And then other than that, whole grains, those are amazing and they're healthy and they're culinarily, they add so much diversity and satiety to the menu. So fill up your diet with other stuff after that. But I think that if you prioritize those food groups, you'll get everything you need. And then, of course, we talk about the notable nutrients like B12 and stuff like that. But those are the key foods that I like for people to focus
on. Can you go through that list? Let's just hit the list real quick of the vitamins.
The notable nutrients, vitamin B12, K2, D, and then iodine and zinc. And then we also talk about the long-chain omega-3 fatty acids, EPA and DHA, because if you're not eating fish, which most people aren't eating fish anyway, then that may be a nutrient of concern as well.
So you're recommending that people supplement with that as opposed to get what they can through their food, that no matter what they're supplementing?
Yeah, definitely get what you can from your food, but it will be impossible to get B12 from your food, right, an adequate, reliable source. D, we're supposed to get from the sun anyway. K2, you can only get if you're eating natto, and that's a whole long thing too. But that you can supplement with K2 as well. It seems like we likely need to. And then iodine, because people are not consuming iodized salt. Or they're using all these fancy salts or avoiding it altogether. So that has become an issue again that kind of has a resurgence of iodine concerns. So
what about what about from nori?
So sea vegetables are definitely an option. They're not as, you can't calculate, it's not as reliable and predictable as you would get from a supplement. So if you eat that every day and you could actually see the measurement on the package, it's probably okay. But it depends. And a lot of people don't like sea vegetables, and a lot of sea vegetables are not necessarily the same in each package. You don't know exactly what you're getting. And some of them are too high. There's hijiki can be too high. And what's the other one that has the arsenic in it? I guess it's hijiki.
I was going to say you want it to be a reliable source, or it's going to be stuck with heavy metals and all kinds of other pollutants.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. And this is the problem with people doing things like, doing, what is the, with the C?
What?
That everybody does, the supplement.
Oh, spirulina?
No, it's a S, spirulina. So any of the blue-green allergies. And the problem with this idea, that one really big fallacy I think we have is that this fallacy of natural, natural is better versus man-made. This is a really bad problem, and it seems to go hand in hand with this community, which is this idea that I'm going to naturally put all this together. So I'll give you an example that everybody will agree with, which is, my carnivore friend says, the reason why you should be eating meat is you can't get B12. And the answer to that is, what's your point, right? That should be everyone's answer. And if any vegan or vegetarian would answer that with me and say, what's your point? Because I can take B12, I can supplement B12, I can fortify with B12, then just apply the same thing to natural versus man-made all the way around. That doesn't mean that there aren't some man-made things that can be an issue. But by and large, we've made food quality man-made or not natural. We've made food quality much better. It's much easier to survive on a modern potato than one that was probably around, 100,000 years ago. right? A tuber of that time. So this idea of once that goes aside, then when we start talking about these supplements, there's a really small list of things that we should do. And the reason why B12, Julieanna and I always want to push on B12 is that everyone over 60 should be doing it. I'm 55. So I'm getting up to that age where, by about 40 or so, you start, going down in terms of your ability to absorb, et cetera. And, that's an intrinsic factor. It's not about of whether it's even in your diet or not in the normal amounts. It's a fact that you're just not getting as much. And B12 has an interesting logarithmic curve. The more you eat, you don't just absorb it all. You actually get less and less and less of it. So the idea of being able to supplement with it, regardless of your diet. So our paper that we wrote together in the Journal of Geriatric Cardiology was dealing specifically with geriatric concerns and B12 is an issue across the board. We've even had a client once before that, had been a vegetarian and just refused to supplement and started with the tingling in the face. And, Julieanna immediately said, what's going on? Are you taking your B12? Well, I don't like to take pills. And, it turned out we caught it in time because it
to go get an injection. Yeah, she got lucky because here's the thing. If you're vegan, there's 50% of vegans are deficient in B12 because they think, I'm getting it from my food. I'm getting it from my nutritional yeast. And no, it's a big problem.
And they don't know it because it's hard to test for.
And it's
delayed. There's a lag time, So as we look through this nutrition portfolio, on one side, you heard the beginning of our message, which says, okay, let's not worry about all this superfluous nutrition that we really don't. So just drop the words protein, carbs, and fat. And let's actually spend just a bit on that. Why do we say, don't ever say the word? Go ahead.
Sorry, before you get into that, we didn't cover the omegas. And okay. I wanted to talk before we move on about the omegas and in terms of flax and chia seeds and hemp hearts and all that. And is that okay? Are people getting what they need? Is it transforming in the body the way it should? Or is that actually necessary to supplement with?
So the truth is we don't know exactly yet. What we do know is that vegans or anyone not eating fish tends to have lower levels of the long chain in their blood. So here's how it works. If you take it in from plant sources, like you said, hemp, chia, flaxseed, walnuts, soy foods like tofu. If you're taking in the ALA, which is very important, ALA, alpha linolenic acid, is the precursor. And what happens is it goes in, you absorb it in your body, and it elongates into the form of EPA, and then elongates even further into the form of DHA. So what happens is it turns out we're not converting it all the way. And when you're eating fish, the fish had already converted into those longer chain. And that's why you're getting it when you eat the fish directly. But when you're not eating the fish and you're just taking it from ALA, we don't convert as much. Does that matter? That's what we don't know yet. So if it matters, and I don't know if it's going to end up mattering, because a lot of things that are associated with those fatty acids and health would be like Alzheimer's, cardiovascular disease, and a plant-based diet does offer, a decreased risk for cardiovascular disease and likely for Alzheimer's as well. So is it an issue? We don't really know. But there are microalgae formulas of EPA and DHA, and more every day. We used to have this one formula we recommended, and now there's so many that we're just kind of testing different ones. I don't think it could hurt. I think it's good to have both the ALA sources. Those foods are really incredibly healthy anyway, the flax, chia, hemp, walnuts, and all that. And then we take omega-3 long chain microalgae formula. We have our clients take it too, because the evidence seems to support supplementing it.
Good. All right. So now let's get back. What were we going to talk about? We were going to talk about
protein, protein, carbs, and fat. So, there's a concept that really is important, and it's used a lot in longevity research, which is the idea of a food being isometabolic. In other words, I think most people at this point would accept that eating an apple is not metabolically similar to drinking the same amount of calories of apple juice. Is that a reasonable assumption you think most of your listeners would say?
I hope so, yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So, to us, neither one of those sounds scary. Apple juice isn't poison, but it's sugar water, right? Maybe it has some vitamins in there and nutrients in there, but trace micronutrients, but they're not metabolically similar. And using that same concept and taking it to the same level, when we talk about protein, well, our body doesn't take in foreign proteins, plural. And I say that because every cell in our body has tens of thousands of proteins, plural, in them. And we synthesize them in our ribosomes. Our DNA are blueprints for proteins, plural. And of course, plants have the same amino acids they use. And in fact, all of the essential amino acids, those 9 that we must get from diet because we don't synthesize them in our own body, no animal synthesizes them. So animals concentrate that nutrition. They don't create it. Every whole plant food has every amino acid. And I know somebody just said drop the mic because they have been led to believe that plants are deficient or don't have at all these other amino acids, essential amino acids, because, and then we're talking about things like methionine and leucine and isoleucine, valine. And the reason why they believe that is because they're more concentrated in our tissue and in animal tissues. But it turns out that those are exactly the amino acids we restrict with longevity in organisms and longevity research for them to live longer. So now if we think about when someone is eating a more concentrated food, which is why maybe you can beat your chest and put on your 5-toed shoes and do 800 push-ups. Maybe you can do that. Maybe that's a sign of being fecund. Maybe that's a sign of doing it. But you might also be, burning fast and fizzling out just as fast, meaning living fast and dying young. So in other words, it's a trade-off. Imagine it as a trade-off. And so, when we're eating 2 different protein sources, those 2 different protein sources, one animal sourced and one plant sourced, yes, the plant is naturally restricted in these amino acids. Well, if you don't know the amino acid profile of the food, then the word protein doesn't mean anything because the excess amino acids that you can't use, your body just liberates them as waste heat within 2 to 4 hours. It doesn't store them as fat. We talked about that earlier. So then we get to carbohydrates. Well, cotton's a carbohydrate. The books in these paper are carbohydrates, the chitin of crab shells are carbohydrates. And I don't think anybody believes that is going to be metabolically similar to, for example, a sugar cube or starch in a potato or the sugar in a fruit. They're not metabolically similar. And to take that concept just a step further, imagine Julieanna and I, as scientists and dietitians, design a clinical trial, and we match calorie per calorie, the protein, carbs, and fat in some fortified sugar sweetened cereal, right? With we'll just even use plant milk on it, or maybe we'll use animal milk. Let's just use that to make it even worse. Versus a lentil stew. Now, does anyone really believe, even though it has exactly the same amount of protein, carbs, and fat, that those are going to be metabolically similar when you eat them? The idea that we're going to make a liquid, perfect diet that we're just going to suck on and drink, yes, we could survive on it for a while, but we probably won't thrive on it. And so, we get to fats and we have the same thing. We all seem to still understand, butter's not back and saturated fats do matter, regardless of what the trends are saying right now. Ansel Keys' work, he wasn't a conspiracy theorist and, he wasn't bought off by the Sugar Commission or whatever. And in fact, Ansel Keys wasn't even a vegetarian or vegan either, and I think right here I have his books here somewhere. But the fact of the matter is that eating different kinds of fat. We were just talking about DHA EPAs as those lipids. We were talking about, which are fatty, the shorter fatty acids relative to the other lipids. And then we look at the chain length. We look at the saturation. There are all these things that say that those fats aren't equivalent. So if fats aren't equivalent and carbohydrates aren't equivalent and proteins are equivalent, why are you putting them all in a bucket and trying to decide what you're eating and using them to track everything? And what's really amazing, back to your experience of your post-40 living, when you stop worrying about that, nothing happens. Like, I didn't know about it. Humans didn't know about it for the first 200,000 or so years. We just discovered them in the last, century or so, actually 1834, if you really want to go to the exact date of when protein, carbs, and fat were used to describe a food. It's right up there on a shelf in a book. in a book. And the fact is that, yes, it has some meaning, but it doesn't mean what people think it means. And so our argument is, if you use our food triangle, and what we've done in the food triangle, and let me try to do this, even though because it will help, and then let me see if this works. Can you guys see that good enough?
So we can see it, and anybody on YouTube can see it.
Right. So talk about the two different, do you want to talk about the diet sides?
No, we use the food triangle as a mnemonic to use in terms of food and with respect to energy. Instead of using protein, carbs, and fat, which we refer to as macro confusion, it's much simpler to just look at food and food groups as, and so on the right side of the triangle is a plant-based diet. And so if you look at it, if you look up the food triangle, we have it in our papers online. We could send you some links to look at it and have a visual of it. It's a new way to think about food instead of using macronutrients, which just make everyone confused, from the layperson to all the media and all the way up to researchers and healthcare providers.
Right. So at the top, for those listening, at the top of the food triangle, leafy greens, cruciferous vegetables, stems like asparagus and celery, mushrooms, bulbs like garlic and onion. Down one descending side, down the left side of the food triangle, you're increasing the energy density of the food with meat, egg, dairy, poultry, fish, and shellfish, things that generally store energy as fats, but we're not calling them fats, but they're just generally over there. Down the right side of the food triangle, you see fruits, cereals, pulses, legumes, starchy vegetables, and those generally store energy as carbohydrates or sugars or starches, and nuts and seeds are the exception that also store them as fat. Now, what you find is a paleo diet eats down the left side of the food triangle, and you'll see that on the left side of the screen if you're looking at it, and, they probably do lose weight. They restrict their diet. If you restrict the calories in your diet, you can lose weight, you can feel healthy, and you may even feel more fecund. You may feel really good and reproductive. The Western diet up the top is bottom feeding, and that's how we normally eat. Burgers and fries, pasta and meat sauce,
fish and chips, curry and rice,
steak and potato, right? We bottom feed because food was economically scarce. And then down the right side, or the vegan side, we go there. So anyway, we just wanted to make sure you look at that, because in vegetarian and vegan, we can sort of come up with an alternate. And we go into this in our book. And then with that, you can really think about eating on the right side of the food triangle and not worrying so much about this protein, carbs, and fat.
Yeah, and for our listeners that want to get the book's called The Healthspan Solution, How and What to Eat to Add Life to Your Years. And we'll put a link to that book in our show notes at planttrainers.com.
Perfect. So we would love to thank you. Oh my gosh. Are you hearing what's going on? I've had so much information now, and I'm trying to process it all. We want to thank you so much for taking your time today to talk to us about this, to let us know about all of these findings, all of this history that you've acquired, not only on your bookshelf, but in your minds as well, and processed it and put it out there. We encourage people to get a hold of your book. And where would you like people to go if they want to learn a little bit more about some of the things that you're offering?
Thank you. You can join us at healthspansolution.com. We've got our podcast link there. Our social media is all there. Everything's all there.
Podcast is Science and Saucery.
Yes.
Cool. And we'll link to all of that in our show notes at planttrainers.com. Thank you both, Julieanna and Ray, for being here with us on the Plant Trainers podcast.
Thank you
so much for having us.
Thank you all so much for listening to this edition of the Plant Trainers podcast. We want to make sure that you subscribe on iTunes, Google Play, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, or any other podcasting platform.
We really appreciate the feedback we receive from you. Every time we get a 5-star rating or review on iTunes from one of our fans, it really helps other people find us, just like you did.
Thanks so much to our patrons. To become a patron, visit us at patreon.com/planttrainers. Even supporting us with $1 really makes a difference in the quality of the show.
And don't forget to connect with us on Instagram and Twitter. Our handle is @PlantTrainers. Like Plant Trainers on Facebook, join our newsletter, and check out our website at planttrainers.com for awesome recipes, a list of our services, and of course, our latest podcast.
We encourage you to email your questions to info@planttrainers.com so that we can help you improve your quality of life through nutrition and fitness.
So we hope we've inspired you today. Join us again next time, and have a healthy day. Or is that too corny?
It's a little cheesy.